G'day from Media Centre at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and poor Carlos Sainz, a second week in a row involved in an accident on the first day of practice. Not as savage as Las Vegas, it certainly did a lot of damage to his car, and I'll tell you more in 8 seconds' time. One of the remarkable things about the accident was that it happened 8 minutes into the session, which is exactly the same time as his accident last week in Las Vegas. I was out at turn 3, I'm shooting car after car coming through, and then I bring my camera back ready to get the next car. I hear this screech, I see the white smoke coming off some tyres. Luckily I was shooting at a fast enough shutter speed that I got a reasonable shot. It took a couple of frames before it locked up, but just as he hit the barrier, I get this particular shot, and this one, and this one, and this one, and then I take the camera away from my face to just have a look, and I can't see any movement in the car, so I pick up my cameras and I move about 25 metres just so that I'm a bit closer to the action. And it did take, I'm guessing, 20 odd seconds before we saw any movement in that car, and yeah, there was movement of his head. One of the interesting things about this photo here, you can see this bloke right above Carlos's head on the hill. He's got his hands up in the air. I don't know what he's cheering about. If indeed he's even cheering, maybe I've misread it, but a couple of you noticed it on my Instagram post. It took him about a minute before he managed to get himself out of the car, and then about 12 seconds after he hit the ground with his feet, the medical car rolled up, and it's standard practice for the driver to get into that medical car and take off back to the medical centre for a routine check. Then the clean-up started, and as you can see here, there were some 7 vehicles helping out. There was a lot of mess to be cleaned up. The car was lifted onto the flatbed truck, and if you have a look at this shot here, you can very clearly see the damage to the side pod, and a lot of the inner workings of the car were visible. In all, the session was stopped for something like 26 minutes, and when we did get going, it wasn't terribly long before I saw somebody running on the other side of the track back towards turn 2, and then I realised that the red flags were out again, so I take off and round the corner to see Nico Hulkenberg out of his car, which had hit the barrier over here and very clearly had suffered some damage. He then headed across the other side of the track. The mess was cleaned up and the car put on another flatbed loader. So a very interesting session with 2 prangs in the space of 35 minutes. For those of you who didn't follow what happened in FP1 today, which was crash-free, we had 10 young drivers in cars. Every team bar AlphaTauri had a rookie driver in there, and Red Bull had 2. It's part of the deal. You have to run a certain number of rookie drivers in FP1s, and because this is the last race of the year, a lot of teams just had to do it. I've never heard of 10 in one session. Other things I think you might find interesting, I took this shot here of Mohammed Ben Sulayem with Jonathan McAvoy, who was the Daily Mail journalist who wrote the story about Lewis's people contacting Red Bull to see whether there might be an opening for him, and this was when their contract negotiations were still in limbo with Mercedes. Christian Horner then came over and joined the trio at Mohammed's insistence, and I thought it quite funny. I had a chat with Jonathan tonight, and he said everyone was fine about it. Apparently it was Lewis's dad Anthony that contacted Red Bull just to see if there was any interest, but of course the story blew up today and was all over the news and mentioned several times in the team principal's press conference. One thing I noticed yesterday in the press conferences was the drivers. A lot of them looked tired, very tired, and it's little wonder because we went through 12 different time zones. It was a complete AM to PM change for our body clocks going from Las Vegas to this particular place, and also the journey was even the quickest, probably 18 hours, and a lot of people taking up to 40 hours to get here. Anyway, we'll struggle on, and thankfully the weather is not too hot. In fact, in the evenings it's fantastically mild. So far I've shot 2 teams' end-of-year shoots. The Ferrari one out on the track, it looked magnificent. Charles Leclerc, impressed with his new helmet. And then earlier in the day I shot the Mercedes team photo in pit lane. And one thing I did notice here, 1 pair of white shoes. Who was wearing the white shoes? Everyone else had black on. It was Mick Schumacher. And at one point the 2 drivers, Lewis and George, stopped for a selfie, which the end result looks like this. Next up, my most popular post on Instagram on Thursday was this one. Lando Norris wearing traditional dress. Not a traditional dress. That was funny, some of the comments. People saying, it's not a dress. people who don't understand the English language. No, this is traditional dress. And I asked Lando what prompted him to wear it, and he said he has a good friend, an Emirati, who suggested it would be a nice thing to do, hence he wore it in. Said he might cop a bit of ridicule over it, but I thought he looked absolutely sensational. Pato O'Ward was out and about doing a seat fitting and also a test to see how long it takes him to get out of the car in an emergency. And I caught him running from hospitality suite to garage, used this picture here, put it up onto Getty Images, and just happened to be at the right time because Pato was announced as a reserve driver next year for McLaren. He's got his super licence, which is important if he wants to end up racing in F1. Sometimes I head into the press conference room and photograph the guys being interviewed by Tom Clarkson, and I couldn't help but note George and the way he looks at Daniel Ricciardo here. There was a bit of banter going on between the two of them. I couldn't tell you what it's about because it's all very hush-hush, but it looked like they were having a lot of fun. It's Franz Tost's last race with AlphaTauri, and they did a tribute to him on the back of the garage with a list of every one of his 351 Grands Prix that he's attended. Out in pit lane, I decided to go out and find some fans wearing some interesting t-shirts with face painted, interesting signs, flags, and it's always a lovely thing to go out and see those fans because they're so darn excited to be so close to the action in pit lane. Here's Valtteri Bottas coming in. I asked him if he was heading back to Australia again for the off-season. He said yes, for some period of time, staying mainly in South Australia, which is Tiffany Cromwell's home state, and where I was born. I did invite him to Western Australia, but doesn't have enough time. Zhou Guanyu was dressed in what I thought looked like summer pyjamas, but it's a very expensive Christian Dior suit. Lewis Hamilton, well, he was dressed in something completely different, what looked like to be a quite hot shirt and some camo pants. Oscar Piastri came in on Thursday wearing an Australia cricket shirt. Not a current one, but from 2003. And which player's shirt was he wearing? Brett Lee. Now, I imagine you have things to do, so before you go, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, and right here you'll find a whole lot of content and merchandise. At the moment, there's 20% off sale on my website for Black Friday. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. Beautiful media centre, what? Shut up, shut up.